Every god in Abraham's world wanted children in the fire. That is the part nobody tells you when they read you this story. In the land Abraham came from, and in the land he walked into, the gods were hungry, and what they were hungry for was sons. A parent who wanted rain or victory, or a good harvest knew the price. You put the child through the flames. You gave up the future to buy the present. This was not rare. It was not the act of a few monsters on the edge of society. It was religion, ordinary and expected, carved into the bones of the ancient Near East. So when a voice tells Abraham to take his son up a mountain and offer him there, Abraham is not hearing something strange. He is hearing something familiar, terribly, ordinarily familiar. The horror we feel reading it now is not the horror he would have felt then. To us, it sounds like a monstrous demand from out of nowhere. To him, it sounded like the kind of thing a god might ask, the price he had grown up believing the divine sometimes required. And that is exactly where the story turns into something no one saw coming. Because the God who gave that command had no intention of taking Isaac. None. The whole climb up that mountain was built to teach Abraham the opposite of what every other altar in that world was teaching. The other gods took your son and gave you nothing. This God walked a father 3 days into the hills to show him that he provides the sacrifice himself. That is what the test was for, not to find out if Abraham would break, but to show Abraham who he had been following all along. Let us be honest about the question that hangs over this chapter because most people never say it out loud. If God already knew Abraham's heart, why put him through it at all? This is the thing that makes readers uneasy, and it should. The God of the Bible is not a God who learns things by experiment. He does not need to run a trial to discover what is inside a person. He made the person. He had already watched Abraham across a quarter-century of conversations, promises, failures, and second chances. So a test that exists to give God new information makes no sense. And if that is what we think is happening, the whole story curdles into cruelty. A divine being toying with a father's worst fear just to see what shakes loose. If that were the story, it would be a story worth walking away from. But that is not the kind of test this is. And the moment you understand the word the writer actually used, the story stops being about a God who needs to know and becomes about a man who needs to see. The whole drama tilts. The spotlight swings off the question of what Abraham will do and onto the question of what Abraham will learn. Those sound similar, but they sit worlds apart. The single thread running through everything that follows is this. The mountain was never a trap. It was a classroom, and the lesson was a person. Keep that in your back pocket as we walk through it because the chapter drops clue after clue, and most of them are buried in words we translate too quickly. To feel the weight of what God asked, you have to know what Isaac was. Abraham was not a young man with sons to spare. He was old. He and his wife had spent decades on a promise that looked, for most of those years, like a cruel joke. God had told him his descendants would outnumber the stars and then handed him a barren marriage and a body well past the age of fathering anyone. The years stacked up. The promise stayed empty. Think about what that waiting does to a person. Abraham was already an old man by the reckoning of his own world when the promise first came. Then 25 more years passed, a whole generation. Long enough to bury hope and dig it up and bury it again. Long enough to try to force the promise on his own terms, which he did. He fathered a son through his wife's servant and learned the hard way that God's promises do not bend to human shortcuts. And still he waited. And then, long after it was biologically absurd, Isaac arrived. The laughter child, named for the laugh that escaped his mother when she first heard she would carry him at 90. The proof that God keeps his word even when the waiting feels like abandonment. Isaac was not just a boy Abraham loved. Isaac was the entire future. Every promise God had ever made to this man ran straight through that one child. The nation, the land, the blessing that would one day reach every family on earth, all of it lived or died with Isaac. Take him out of the picture, and you do not just break a father's heart. You unmake everything God said he would do. To ask for Isaac was, on its face, to ask God to cancel his own promise. One detail in the Hebrew lands harder than most translations let you feel. When God gives the command, he piles up the words. Your son, your only son, the one you love, Isaac. It is slow. It is deliberate. It refuses to let Abraham look away from exactly how much this costs. God is not softening the blow. He is naming it fully before he asks. And notice where this man came from. Abraham was born in Ur, deep in Mesopotamia, and migrated through Haran before God ever called him toward Canaan. That was a world thick with gods, each city with its own, each demanding its own rights. It was a culture soaked in the worship of powers that took what was precious and gave back fear. He was not raised knowing the God who would later carve, "You shall not murder," into stone. That law was centuries away. He was a man stepping out of a pagan world, still learning, conversation by conversation, the character of the one who had called him out of it. So, when the command comes, Abraham has no scripture to consult, no commandment to lean on, no precedent that tells him this God is different. He has no way of knowing yet that the story ends with a ram instead of a son. He only knows the voice he has come to trust across 25 years and the long road up. That is the position he is in when he saddles his donkey the next morning. Not certainty, but trust walking into the dark. Here is where the language opens a door most readers walk right past. The story opens by telling us God tested Abraham. In English, test can sound cold, even hostile. We think of a trap, an exam designed to catch you failing, a teacher hoping you slip. But the Hebrew word underneath is nasa, and it does not carry that cruelty at all. Nasa means to prove, to try something in order to show what it truly is. The lexicons line it up with the image of refining metal, putting gold into the fire, not to destroy it, but to bring out what was already there and let everyone see it as real. The same word shows up later when the Queen of Sheba comes to test Solomon with hard questions. She was not trying to trip him up and watch him crumble. She came to find out whether the wisdom she had heard about was genuine, and she left convinced it was. That is the flavor of the word, not a trap, but a proving. That is a completely different picture from the one most of us carry. A trap is built so you will fail. A proving is done because something genuine is worth revealing. When a jeweler puts gold in the flame, he is not hoping it turns to ash. He already believes it is gold. The fire just makes the truth of it visible, undeniable, and bright. The heat does not create the gold, it displays it. So, the verb is doing quiet but crucial work in the very first line. It tells us, the readers, something Abraham himself does not yet know as he climbs. God is not gambling on Abraham. God is revealing him. The outcome was never in doubt in heaven. The whole point was to make it visible on earth. This is the first time this word appears in the whole Bible, and it sets the tone for every test that follows. Scripture is careful to keep these two ideas apart. God proves people to strengthen and reveal their faith. He never entices anyone toward evil. One of the letters in the New Testament says it flatly that God tempts no one, that he cannot even be tempted by evil himself. So, whatever is happening on that mountain, it is not God trying to make Abraham fall. It is God bringing into the open a faith that was already real. The way fire brings out the gold that was already there, which reframes the whole ordeal. The test was not God asking, "Will this man fail?" It was God saying, in effect, "Let it be seen on earth and in heaven what this man's trust is actually made of." A faith that has only ever been spoken as just words. Promises are cheap when nothing is on the line. It is easy to say you would trust God with everything when no one has asked you to hand anything over. Abraham's faith stopped being a sentence and became an act out in the open on a mountain where it could never again be doubted by him or by anyone watching. And notice the words the voice uses when it stops him. "Now I know that you fear God." To fear God in the Hebrew way of speaking was never about being terrified of him. It meant to hold him in the highest place, to order your whole life around him, to take him so seriously that nothing else, not even the son you waited a lifetime for, sits above him. The test did not manufacture that reverence in Abraham. It revealed it. The fire showed the gold. Quick word before we keep going. If these word studies are landing for you, the simplest way to help this channel is to subscribe. And if you are already a member or a supporter, thank you. That is what keeps these studies coming. Even one comment telling me what hit you today helps more people find this than you would guess. Now, back up the mountain. Watch what Abraham does on the way because his own words turn out to be more true than he knew. 3 days they walked. 3 days is a long time to carry a command like that. Long enough to turn back 100 times. Long enough for the first wave of shock to wear off and the cold arithmetic to set in. The mountain was not next door. The text has Abraham setting out from the south, and the place God names is days of walking north through open country with the boy beside him the whole way. There is no record of a single word spoken on that road until Isaac breaks the silence. Just a father, a son, 2 servants, a donkey, and the wood. And Abraham keeps walking. There is one small word at the very start of the chapter that tells you everything about the man. When God first calls his name, Abraham answers, "Here I am." It is a single word in Hebrew, and it means more than just present. It means ready, available, turned fully toward the one who is speaking, holding nothing back. He answers that way before he knows what the call will cost him. That is the posture he carries up the entire mountain. When they reach the foot of it, he tells his servants to wait, and he says something strange. He says, "The boy and I will go up, and we will worship, and we will come back to you. Both of us. We will return." Whether that was faith straining toward hope or something deeper he could not have explained, Abraham speaks as though Isaac is coming back down that hill with him. He does not say, "I will return." He says, "We." Then Isaac, carrying the wood on his own back, asks the question that must have split his father in two. "Father, here is the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb?" And Abraham answers, "God will provide for himself the lamb." He did not know how true that sentence was, because the Hebrew behind provide is one of the most beautiful turns in the entire passage, and it hides under a plain English word. The word is yireh, and it does not first mean supply or hand over. It means to see, to look, and to perceive. It is the same root that describes a prophet, a seer, someone who sees what others cannot. So, when Abraham says God will provide the lamb, the Hebrew is closer to God will see to it. God will see the need, and in seeing it, meet it. In this language, God's seeing and God's providing are not two separate acts. They are one motion. When God truly sees what you lack, the provision is already on its way. To be seen by God is to be supplied by God, and the wordplay runs deeper than that one line. The whole mountain is built on this single verb. The region itself, Moriah, sounds in Hebrew like the word for seeing. Abraham tells Isaac, "God will see to the lamb." Then, at the summit, when the ram appears, Abraham names the place, "The Lord will see." And the narrator adds a saying that was still repeated in Israel generations later, "On the mountain of the Lord, it will be seen too." See, see, see. The text hammers the same root again and again, like a bell rung 4 times, so you cannot miss it. This is a story about a God who sees. The whole 3-day walk was aimed at a place that would carry that name forever. He did not know, when he answered Isaac on the road, that he was speaking prophecy, but he was. And that is precisely how the story resolves. Abraham builds the altar. He lays out the wood. He binds his son. And there is a whole tradition that lingers on the fact that Isaac, old enough to carry a load of firewood up a mountain, was strong enough to resist a father slowed by age and did not. Whatever passed between them in that moment, the son submitted. He let himself be bound. The father raises the knife. This is the last possible second. The narrative slows down here on purpose, stretching out each motion, the binding, the laying down, the hand lifted with the blade. Everything in you wants the story to have stopped one beat earlier. It does not. God lets Abraham go all the way to the edge, because a faith proved at the edge is a different thing than a faith that was never asked to move. And then, the voice breaks in. "Stop. Do not lay a hand on the boy. Now, I know that you fear God because you have not withheld your son from me." Then Abraham looks up, and there, caught by its horns in a thicket, is a ram, a substitute provided, seen to. He takes the animal and offers it in place of his son, and he names that place with a name that has echoed for 4,000 years. The Lord will provide. On the mountain of the Lord, it will be seen to. Sit with the timing of that name. Abraham did not name the place. The Lord provides, back at the bottom of the hill, before the climb, when it was easy to say. He named it at the summit, after the worst 3 days of his life, with the knife still warm in his hand, and his son climbing down off the wood alive. The provision had a name only because he had climbed all the way up to the place where he could finally see it. You do not learn that God sees to it from the safety of the valley. You learn it on the mountain, at the top, in the moment you were sure was the end. That is the answer the whole ordeal was built to deliver. Not, will Abraham obey? Abraham obeying was the gold the fire revealed, real and bright, but it was never the prize. The real gift was the name. Abraham came down that mountain carrying knowledge of God he could not have gotten any other way. Knowledge no sermon could have handed him. No easy season could have taught him. This is the God who sees. This is the God who provides the sacrifice himself. Now hold this story up against the world it was born into, because the contrast is the whole point. Across the ancient Near East, The gods of Abraham's neighbors did demand children. The records are not subtle, and they do not come only from the Bible. A first-century historian described a bronze image with outstretched hands sloped so that a child placed on them would roll down into a pit of fire below, and he noted that the families standing nearby were forbidden to weep. Archaeologists have argued over the scale of it for decades, but the practice was real, woven into the worship of more than one people in that world. The Bible names a deity Molech tied to exactly this, and it returns to the subject again and again with horror. This was the going rate of devotion in that world. The most precious thing you had surrendered to a God who only ever took. That is the religious air Abraham breathed. When the command came to offer his son, it would not have struck him as unthinkable. It would have struck him as the expected norm. The shock of this story for its first hearers was never the command. The shock was the ending. The God of Abraham walks his servant right up to the edge of that same act. The act every surrounding culture would have recognized, and then he stops it hard. And not just here, everywhere else in Scripture that this practice appears, God's response is fury. He calls it detestable. He says, through one of the prophets, that such a thing had never even entered his mind, that he never commanded it and never wanted it. The law he later gives forbids it outright on pain of being cut off from the people. The God who paused Abraham's knife spends the rest of the Bible tearing this practice out by the roots wherever his people drift toward it. Kings who burn their children are remembered as among the worst in the nation's history. So, the binding of Isaac is doing something its first audience would have felt in their gut. It takes the most familiar religious act in their world and turns it inside out. Every other altar said the same thing. Your God takes your son and leaves you empty. This altar said something no one had heard. This God stops your hand and provides the offering himself, and gives your son back down the mountain alive. One guardrail is worth naming plainly here because this passage gets twisted. Far from endorsing human sacrifice, this story is the moment the God of the Bible draws a line through the middle of the ancient world and says, "That is not who I am, and that is not what I want from you." He never wanted Isaac. He wanted Abraham to know that. And this is where the story reaches forward in a way that is hard to unsee once you have seen it. The place Abraham climbed was in the region of Moriah. Generations later, the Hebrew scriptures tell us that same ridge of high ground became the place where Solomon built the temple, the center of Israel's whole life of worship and sacrifice. Every lamb offered there, every day of atonement, every pilgrim who came up to be made right with God, came to the mountain where a father had once been stopped from giving his son. The hill of the binding became the hill of forgiveness for a whole nation. That is not a coincidence the writers stumbled into. They knew exactly what ground they were standing on. And the shape of the story keeps rhyming generation after generation. A father, a beloved son, his only son in the deepest sense of the word, wood for the offering carried up a hill on the son's own shoulders. A long walk toward a death the father could not bear and would not refuse. A son who does not fight it, who lets himself be laid on the wood. A substitute provided at the last moment so the son could live. Every beat of it leaves a fingerprint. Centuries after Abraham, on that same stretch of high ground outside Jerusalem, the rhyme completed itself. Another father, another beloved son carrying wood up a hill on his own back, only this time no voice called from heaven to stop it. This time there was no ram in the thicket, because this time the son was the ram. The lamb Abraham promised Isaac God would provide, the substitute the whole mountain was named after, had finally arrived in person. And what God spared Abraham, God did not spare himself. The Lord will provide stopped being a hope whispered on a mountain and became a person on a cross. Abraham named the place for a provision he glimpsed from far off. The rest of us have seen what he was squinting toward. This connection is not forced onto the text from outside. It sits right there in the geography, in the shape of the climb, in the wood and the sun and the substitute. The story was always aimed here. Picture the ram for a moment, because it tells you something the words almost hide. That animal was not led up the mountain by Abraham. He brought wood and fire and a knife, but no offering. The text is careful about this. Isaac even asks where the lamb is, because there plainly was not one. The ram was already there, on the mountain, caught in the brush before Abraham ever arrived, which means the provision was waiting at the top of the climb the entire time Abraham was walking up in the dark, certain he had nothing. Sit with that for a second. While Abraham was carrying the worst grief a father can carry, while every step up that slope felt like a step toward loss, the answer was already standing in the thicket near the summit, breathing, waiting. He just could not see it yet. He would not see it until he reached the place where God meant to show him. The provision was never late. It was early. It was there first. It was simply out of sight until the climb brought him to where he could finally look up and find it. That is the part of this story that reaches off the page and into your actual life. The mountain got its name on the mountain. Abraham did not learn that God provides while everything was fine. He learned it in the middle of the hardest climb of his life, at the top, after the worst of it, when the knife was already raised. The name, "The Lord will see to it," was forged in the one place Abraham would have given anything to avoid. You are probably carrying something right now that you cannot see the end of. A waiting that has gone on too long. A grief with no bottom to it. A fear you walk around with all day and sit down for no one. And the instinct, the deep human instinct, is to believe that God only provides once the climb is over. Once you are safely back down and it all worked out and you can see the whole shape of it. We want the ram in hand before we take the first step. We want to be shown the thicket from the bottom of the hill. But that is not what Abraham learned. Abraham learned that the provision is already on the mountain. It is already in the thicket. It was there before he started walking, waiting at a place he had not reached yet. Every hard step up was a step towards something already prepared, even while his hands were empty and his heart was breaking. That does not mean every story ends the way you would script it. The Bible never promises that, and any preacher who tells you otherwise is selling something the text does not contain. Sometimes the climb is long, and the answer is not the one you wanted. What the story promises is narrower and stronger than a guaranteed happy ending. It promises the thing Abraham came down knowing. The God you are walking toward is not a God who takes and leaves you empty like the idols of that old world. He is the God who sees, and the seeing and the providing in his hands are the same thing. You may not see it until the summit. Abraham did not. But the ram is already caught in the branches. You just have not turned the last corner yet. So why did God test Abraham with his son? Not to discover something he did not know. He already knew the gold was gold. Not because he wanted Isaac, because he never did and he spent the rest of Scripture proving it. He tested Abraham the way fire proves what is precious, to bring a real faith out into the open where it could be seen. And he did it on a specific mountain, at a specific summit, so that a grieving father could stand at the top and learn the name that would outlast him by 4,000 years. The Lord will provide. The Lord sees, and in seeing, he sees to it. Abraham went up that mountain to give God everything and came down having received the one thing he could never have manufactured on his own. He came down knowing who God is. If this study helped you see something old in a new way, subscribe so the next one finds you and leave a comment, even one word, because even one word helps us reach someone who needs to hear this. Share it with the person who came to mind while you were listening. God bless you.